Good evening to my YouTube audience. Glad to see you here on this now Wednesday, November 16th, 2022, in the early morning at around 12:30 a.m. I wanted to get on here sooner than later, but I wanted to make sure I had all the information that I wanted to have in terms of what I saw. I just came back from seeing the film Wakanda Forever, and I'm glad to share my brief review of it. I recommend it, excuse me, but I think we have to take in account other people's opinions of it without accepting or turning a blind eye to social media platforms completely blocking their opinion. Make let's make sure that by calling something a label, we're not promoting wrong values. And certainly, we've seen with what happened to Kyrie Irving and what happened to Ye and Dave Chappelle, the label of anti-Semitism. And I remember fondly many uh, European Jews, some of whom I grew up with and had very strong, close relationships, particularly when I was around between 9 and 10 years old. My family moved from White Plains, New York to Suffolk County, Long Island. And that was a whole community of uh, Jewish white people. And we were great. We were real cool. And then even here in DC, I met a lot of practicing Jews, white practicing Jews, and they were cool. And they were the first ones to really educate me on how the label anti-Semitism is too often used, to as a tool of control to try and censor. So I wanted to share two particular authors who are one of whom is a practicing Jew, who edited a whole collection on the difference between those who believe in Judaism, white people, Europeans, who believe in Judaism, and those who believe in Zionism. And one of those authors is Carolyn Karcher, who I met at my church that I attended, Plymouth Congregational United Church of Christ, where Reverend Graylin S. Hagler was pastor. He just stepped down 2 months ago. But at his church, I came across this book called Stories of Personal Transformation, Reclaiming Judaism from Zionism. And like so many, this whole mainstream, what we hear in the mainstream about the label anti Semitism, in my mind, as just an observer and a citizen and an informed citizen, it's just used so loosely. The term anti Semitism seems to be used so loosely. And there's a big difference. The people that are using it are, in fact, a big minority. They're a serious minority of the Jewish population in the United States. You see a lot of criticisms online by Jews of other Jews that are using that label. One that sticks out in my head is the one by Max Blumenthal. He's an awesome uh, journalist who I encourage everybody listening to follow. He founded the Gray Zone News, and he's constantly being attacked on Wikipedia by very militaristic people who want to insert, and make his Wikipedia turn him into a stereotype. And he's somebody who's fought misinformation valiantly. And so has Carolyn Karcher, who I met at my church, like I said, and she edited this book, Reclaiming Judaism from Zionism, Stories of Personal Transformation. And in this book, you really see the difference between those who will loosely use anti-Semitism, like we see Greenblatt of the ADL using it, and individuals like Carolyn Karcher and several rabbis who did not find what Dave Chappelle said to be anti-Semitic. I just wanted to read a page from Carolyn's introduction. Um, it says on Roman numerals 4 and 5. This is the cover of the book. Let me see if I can get it out right. I showed it right here. And she has an interesting introduction that I want to read. She gives you the history of how Zionism in the United States developed. And from the development of Zionism comes the use of the term anti-Semitism. very loosely that we see all the way, almost 400 years now. And so Karcher writes, she's talking about, uh, no, is it Herzl? No, she's talking here about Brandeis. I want to make sure I get the subject. Yes, the sentence that's cut off at the very top of this excerpt that I have here says Judas credits the leadership of Louis Brandeis with much of the American Zionist movement's dynamism, Karcher writes. Brandeis assured American Jews that they could be Zionists without having any intention of moving to Palestine themselves. Judas also defined, yes, Judis is the author's name, who she, Carolyn Karcher, is quoting to talk about the history of Louis Brandeis and Zionism in the United States. Judas also defined Jewish nationality in terms as compatible with Americanism as the nationality of Irish or Italian Americans, all of whom, he insisted, could be better Americans by supporting their homes overseas, while acknowledging the ingenuity with which Brandeis dispelled the principal objection Reform Jews had raised against Zionism. Judas highlights the glaring contradiction that would haunt American Zionists into the 21st century. Brandeis and his circle of friends, proteges, and disciples, which included Stephen Wise, an influential Reform rabbi, and Felix Frankfurter, who would succeed Brandeis on the Supreme Court, were outspoken defenders of the poor, the oppressed, and the disenfranchised in the US, but saw Palestine's Arabs largely through the prism of Western colonialism and Jewish nationalism. Judas elaborates Brandeis reconciled Zionism with liberalism, Karcher writes, by convincing himself that Jews in Palestine were trying to create a society based on a democratic brotherhood. So, argued Brandeis, in being a Zionist and building a home for European Jews suffering from anti Semitism, an American Jew was upholding the brotherhood of man. Now, Karcher gets into her really strong point. The blindness that Brandeis, Wise, Frankfurter, and their liberal Zionist peers exhibited to the viewpoint of the Palestinians on whose land European Jewish immigrants aspired to erect a society that excluded Palestinians from its ideal of human brotherhood even led them to advocate the transfer of the Arab population of Palestine to Iraq or Transjordan or to other unpopulated Arab lands. Judas attributes their blindness. He's talking about the blindness of Brandeis, Wise, and Frankfurter, their blindness in not seeing the consequences of what the Palestinians call al-Nakba, their blindness primarily to the imperial mindset that both European colonialism and the US ideology of manifest destiny from the 19th century that began with the expansion of the US with the Louisiana Territory up until, Teddy Roosevelt in the year 1900. The US ideology of manifest destiny had inculcated in American Zionists. Brandeis and his circle viewed the Zionist settlers as pioneers, pilgrims, and Puritans, and the Arabs as Indians, Judas points out. So I just wanted to look at that. And this is another book in light of all of this. By the way, before I go to the next book, I definitely wanted to shout out this awesome brand of clothing that I just bought, Fearless by Devante. I know the creator, and the way he lives his life, the way he works, the way he has his 9 to 5, the way he makes sure he has his artistic outlet is absolutely fearless. So that's why I'm sporting this awesome cap. So check out his items. You can see his website. His website is Fearless by Devante, Devonte, fearlessbydevante.com. Check out his work. Another book in the onslaught of headlines we get about individuals being anti-Semitic that I wanted to bring up is this very important book that I bought. And I started learning about her about half a decade ago. Her name is Alison Weir, and she is the author of Against Our Better Judgment, The Hidden History of How the US was Used to Create Israel. And on this cover is a man whose first name I can't see, and his last name is Strauss. In the middle is who Karcher mentioned earlier, Louis Brandeis. And then on the right is Karcher also mentioned, and that man is Stephen Wise, Rabbi Stephen Wise, who was a big leader in the American Zionist movement. But this part of Alison's book really caught my attention. Um, I want to share with you. I do have the physical copy right here also, and I encourage you check this book out. This is on. I can't get the page number, but I do want to read. This is one of her notes by Alison Weir. Alison Weir writes, "The man who was often called the father of the political Zionist movement that led to the creation of Israel was Theodore Herzl." Now, I first learned about Herzl through Kwame Ture in the autobiography that was edited by Equuame Michael Thelwell. Where is writing here? Herzl's views of Jews and anti-Semitism were seminal to this movement and were espoused in his books and diaries. These show Herzl grappling with the Jewish question, espousing views that alternated between negative and grandiose views of Jews. Where writes Herzl believed that anti-Semitism resulted wherever Jews went. So, which leads me to believe is actually what Kyrie Irving or what Ye did anti-Semitic, or are they expressing pride in their heritage or their identity? To what extent? Where's the line? Is my question. Herzl believed, Where quotes his book in the Jewish State. Theodore Herzl, originally published in 1946 by the American Zionist Emergency Council. Louis Lipsky writes, Herzl saw the Jews in every land encircled by enemies, hostility to them growing with the increase in their numbers. Herzl felt that the current situation of Jews largely living in ghettos had created an abnormal culture, writing, if the Jews are to be transformed into men of character in a reasonable period of time, say 10 or 20 years or even 40, it cannot be done without migration. That's from Herzl. And as Weir writes, um, he believed that anti-Semitism was wherever Jews went. So this raises the question for me, where is the line between what is not anti-Semitism and what is? It doesn't seem to be clear with these headlines, most recently against Chappelle. If you are learning something from this, if you haven't heard of Karcher, if you haven't heard of Weir, don't hesitate to send me some love. I appreciate it. Through my Cash App. My Cash App is $Roan Fraser, RHONEFRASER. Uh, I appreciate, she has a very interesting chapter. I took a lot of notes on this book. She has chapter on um, just how this idea of US Zionism is in the lobby and how the label and the accusation of anti-Semitism comes from US Zionism. She talks about the media, and it got me, I got a good probe, a good question from a colleague. Jeffrey Anderson Gunter asked me about a Jamaican myth called Bagawaya, and it reminded me of the media, you know, the same way that Weir is talking about the media here in this book, really, and how it's controlled by a political agenda, like everything is. Everything has a political agenda, whether we want to acknowledge it or not. In Rupert Lewis's book, I was very intrigued by the way he quoted the media, the media in Garvey's time, which was not like what we have now, smartphone news. We get news from smartphones or television. In Garvey's time, it was the print media. And I was appreciative of how Rupert Lewis wrote newspaper articles in Garvey's time, but how, like many of us critical thinkers, I like the way Rupert Lewis was able to read between the lines, right? He didn't take what was in the newspapers at face value. He interpreted it. I appreciate the way Professor Rupert Lewis interpreted the newspapers in the context of Garvey's time and how he didn't. This is the skill of a good writer, a good historian, a good context creator. Um, they're able to describe the context, the greater context. And I appreciate how. By the way, please comment, like, share if you're just watching this. Please, I welcome comments. I welcome comments. I hope I see them. I'm going to put my phone on the YouTube station so I'm also able to see your comments. I want to make sure I see them. Please comment if you're just watching this. As I mentioned, I appreciate the way Rupert Lewis puts the articles of the Jamaica Gleaner in the context while Garvey was alive to show the hostility. He did that for many pages in this 13th chapter of his book, Marcus Garvey, Anti-Colonial Champion. So what Lewis is doing is he in this part that I underline, he's going beyond what the newspaper said. So the newspaper said this is around 1929, the year 1929, that Garvey lost the election. And because Garvey lost the election, that means that the people did not support him. The Jamaican people did not support him. And Professor Rupert Lewis just looks a little deeper. He writes, in the end, however, the electoral results were hardly a measure of Garvey's influence. One reason was that the majority of his supporters were disenfranchised. 7.75% of the population in Jamaica was registered to vote, and only 2.74 of the total population actually cast ballots out of an estimated population of 1,014,163 in 1930. In analyzing his own defeat, Garvey reckoned the thousands who attended and cheered at the party's meetings indicate that if you, the poor people, had a vote, our party would have been sent to the legislature. He's talking about his own party that he was part of. The voters have turned back the clock for another 2 years, but the party system is well established in your minds and it will come, it is bound come. Garvey also alluded to the electoral bribery as a cause for his defeat. The people of my race, unfortunately, were fed on rum, sugar, and water and sandwiches as a reward for their votes. Mr. Seymour, I was approached to send rum into certain sections of the parish to give money away and to send provisions, etc., which I refused to do, Garvey said. If I could not have gotten the people's votes because of the merit of my policy, then they were quite at liberty to vote for Mr. Seymour on the rum, sugar, and water and bread that they got. I'm only sorry that while the people of my race and their votes in the hilly regions, in this way, they vote in this way, the people of Mr. Seymour's race voluntarily want to, and I think he ends up saying, Garvey ends up saying that they ultimately want to went to the polls to vote for Seymour. So Garvey is explaining exactly why he lost. But I appreciate how what Rupert Lewis is doing in showing the newspaper. He has lots of quotes of Jamaica Gleaner, but as I was reading the quotes from the Gleaner and I was reading Lewis, there was a huge difference. So I appreciate how Professor Rupert Lewis read between the lines of the Jamaica Gleaner. I want to look also at an amazing novelist. I told everybody on my last YouTube that I'm still in the middle of Kei Miller's amazing novel, August Tone, and I highly recommend it. Kei Miller does the same thing, but in a fictional form. Remember, his novel is about Alexander Bedward, okay? And he quotes an actual article from the Jamaica Gleaner about Bedward, but the tone is highly condescending, not only towards Bedward, but towards his followers. This is a page from Kei Miller's novel, The Gleaner, Kingston, Jamaica, Wednesday, December 15th, 1920. This is before his dramatic death in the 30s. And so this editorial writer, I assume, for The Gleaner says, he began as Bedward, metamorphosed into Father Bedward, and now has attained the dignity of Lord Bedward. He commenced as one who would stare at the sun as it rode in the heavens in all its majesty and glory at noontide. He now aspires to ascend to heaven like Elijah, possibly in a chariot of fire, but at all events, amidst the shouts and acclamations of his followers, who at this moment profess to be preparing for the judgment day. Thus has Mr. Bedward evolved from a simple country peasant into a religious leader and prophet of thousands. And now one is wondering whether we have reached the last phase of Edwardism. Um, I'm looking for the actual, yeah, so the tone basically is condescending, but I appreciate Kei Miller's choice to include the press, to include what was written in the newspapers, because at this time in the 20s, newspapers were far more influential. And I compare that to now, the headlines that we get, how influential, even though they might be very incorrect and false, they're still powerful, they're still influential. And so by doing it this way, Kei Miller is encouraging the reader, question what you get in your smartphone news, in your print news, in your TV news. Don't be afraid to question it. Don't be afraid to question it, as Rupert Lewis did in interpreting what the stories, the Gleaner stories meant about the actual influence of Garvey. I just came back from seeing the amazing film Wakanda Forever, and it was quite interesting. I would recommend it. Um, Angela Bassett had a very strong leading performance. I had an interesting taste in my mouth about this sequel because when I first saw the original, I didn't. I was put off. Yeah, that's the word to put. That's the term to describe my feeling. I was kind of put off by the ending because it seemed like Wakanda was trusting the outside agent, and that's who kind of begins, and he's still a character in the sequel. And I was a little troubled by that because the suggestion is you can trust the outside CIA agent, right, with vibranium. And for me, that was a big question mark. I'm like, no, especially after reading so many books and researching and seeing the nefarious um, goals of the CIA, particularly when it came to assassinating powerful, influential leaders. I had my doubts about whether the CIA agent could, in fact, help the development of vibranium. And shout out to an amazing performance by that agent who we see in this sequel. I want to make sure. Okay, I'm looking for the actor's name who played the agent, the CIA agent, who is the connection between um, some Ramunda, who is Angela Bassett's character, and the scientific mind she wants to develop vibranium. Because the beginning of Wakanda Forever is Ramunda, performed by Angela Bassett, demanding that her soldiers, her daughter, capture and bring this Western mind back to Wakanda to develop vibranium. She developed the technology for a vibranium detector. And it was just very interesting to me to see how as a student at MIT, this student that Ramunda is after, is young. She's so young, but she is sought after by Ramunda. And in the process of trying to bring this beautiful Black young mind from MIT to Wakanda, they're kidnapped. I'm not going to give too much away. And so that's the whole story. That's the suspense that's created. For me, it's raising in my mind the question of development, resource development. It reminds me of the whole story reminds me of that meme of the hands and holding dirty water on the bottom, and at the top you see a hand holding diamonds, and then you see the other hand holding dirty water, and the message at the bottom of the meme asks, how can Africa produce diamonds but not have clean water? Question mark. So this issue of development, comes back to Dr. Walter Rodney, um, his main thesis, which says, the title of his book, which is called How Europe Underdeveloped Africa. I appreciate the whole contemplation this film provides about um, the Wakanda wanting to develop it, but there's a danger in development, especially with technology, because there's a whole industry behind the technology. You have to follow the people who run the industry, which is kind of puts you in their control. But I saw Jared Ball's review, and I appreciated his point about um, the film having no, just focusing on the individuals in the top of the monarchy of Wakanda and showing no relationship between those individual leaders and the masses of the people, right? I appreciated the backstory of the indigenous culture that is at war with Wakanda. I appreciated the actor. I appreciated the backstory because it's really the story that's told by Eduardo Galeano in The Open Veins of Latin America. The indigenous and was decimated by the smallpox, and that whole story of the warring nation, which looks like a water nation. The Wakandans live in the air. The nation that they're fighting, for the most part in this film, is of the water, and they wanted to make an alliance against the U.S. basically. And in my mind, it just reminded me of how this alliance. It reminds me of the U.S.-Israel alliance. So the film almost posits that kind of alliance, the way that the real life, just like the real life alliance between U.S. and Israel, Wakanda Forever suggesting that a U.S. Wakanda alliance is is what the Wakandans who are in charge want. Ramunda wanted that. That is why she was on the phone having a correspondence, even though she was at the UN at the beginning. And she's on the phone and she's talking with the CIA agent, um, and getting intel from him and working together. And 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 the U.S. is using this young black woman's mind to create the vibranium detector technology. But that water kingdom, the indigenous nation, that was an amazing addition in my mind. And it just brought in, I think the moral of the whole Wakanda Forever is that there is a danger in development. Development is a two-edged sword. Once you start to do it, you become colonized by the nation that originally developed the technology. There's a potential danger. I love how at the end of the film, Lupita Nyong'o's character encourages the daughter character. I want to get the daughter's character's name right. Um, Performed by Letitia Wright, Shuri. So Shuri listens to wise counsel and chooses not to murder the indigenous chief. And I thought that was a relief for me. But yeah, the danger of development. I encourage everybody to go watch Wakanda Forever. In addition, even better than Wakanda Forever, read Todd Stephen Burroughs' book, Marvel's Black Panther. I read it, and it gives you so much background on how Marvel developed the Black Panther series, which has become now this big film. It's fascinating to me how Stan Lee, you know, they were clearly responding to the Black Panther Party. That's how Marvel, the effect of it, the influence of it, and the power of it. So, one thing you also have to pay attention to is people's responses. I appreciated also a response to this film by Courtney Michelle. Um, she has a YouTube clip called Disappointed at Wakanda Forever, where she critiques the film for its lack of men. And I agree, the men were absent, but I wasn't expecting much from Marvel Comics. They wouldn't show strong black men. I get it. They never really have, and they've always been uncomfortable, as Burroughs has mentioned in his book. So check out Marvel's Black Panther. Um, a- More so than watching Wakanda Forever. Be aware that the main moral of Wakanda Forever is that danger of developing technology so that you don't become controlled by those forces who originated it first. I mean, this is just like guns, right? The West Africans were the first to create the technology to make a gun, but it was the Europeans who were able to manipulate it to their benefit and use it to begin the slave trade, beginning with the Portuguese. So check out Marvel's Black Panther. Thank you for joining my 24th YouTube Live. Don't hesitate to subscribe, like, and share. And when you feel moved, donate to my Cash App, $Rome Fraser. Thanks for watching.